Okay, so first, Bob, thank you very much. I want to thank Bob and Nassau BOCES, all my friends from Nassau BOCES. They do a great job, and we do have a great working relationship with them. And I see my dear friend Roger Tillis is here in the audience as well. Again, because I'm blinded by this light, I have no idea. There you are. I see the wave. Very good. So I can see. Thank you for having me. I was asked to speak a little bit about the future of work on Long Island, and that can be pretty broad. And so I want to share with you a bunch of things. I want to talk a little bit about the Long Island economy, and then I want to talk about some of the challenges, and then I want to talk about some of the opportunities that I see for us here, especially in the area of education. And why is the economy important? Well, obviously it's important, but it needs to be very important, and it is very important to the educational community. First, people don't always look at our educational system as a business, but it is a large, very large business. It's one of the largest businesses on Long Island, employing well over 100,000 people on Long Island. The largest employer in New York State now is Northwell. They're in about 75. They grow by 200 almost every week. So they're like 75,000. And the largest single site employer on Long Island is Stony Brook University, and they have about 15,000 people right there on the campus. But the educational institutions here on the island, K through 12, well over 100,000. And so it's important. Those people make money, they buy homes, they live in our communities, they support our downtowns. And so, it's important to look at the educational community as a business. But more importantly, and a little bit, self-interest here, you guys are training our future workforce. And so from that perspective, and almost more importantly, the business community always needs to be supportive and working with the educational community because you guys are training our future workforce. So in terms of the Long Island economy, if you look at statistics, everything's peachy keen. Our unemployment rate is one of the lowest in the entire state of New York, one of the lowest in the country, a little over 3%. The economists, when many of us were going to college, said 5% unemployment is full employment. So we're under 4%. So unemployment is low. Our sales tax revenues in both Nassau and Suffolk County are up. Sales taxes are one of the best barometers of spending. And retail spending on Long Island makes up for almost 3/4 of our gross domestic product. People make money and then they spend money. And we happen to have one of the most highest disposable incomes of any region in the country. And when people are spending, then they're being charged sales tax. So sales tax is a good barometer of how the economy is doing. And both in Nassau and Suffolk County, they are up. You guys rely more on the property tax, but the sales tax for both counties generates over $1 billion for each county. So over $2 billion a year just in sales taxes. And our real estate market has largely recovered from the Great Recession. Residential market, you see the stories, it's a seller's market, not enough supply, prices have been increasing. Commercial buildings, hovering around 11% vacancy rate, which is pretty healthy. And our industrial vacancy rate is very small, under 5%. And a lot of that is because New York City changed the zoning in Brooklyn and Queens to a lot of industrial operations moved out to Nassau and Suffolk as Queens and Brooklyn were being converted into residential units. And we capitalized on that. And our tourism industry is up. Again, tourism includes people who spend money in our hotels, vacation here, staycation here, the bar, restaurant industry throughout Long Island, $6 billion industry in Nassau and Suffolk County. And again, so if you look at the statistics, all those indicators show that the Long Island economy is doing very well, certainly better than many regions of the country. But we know there are challenges. And, when people talk about our challenges, they talk about our traffic, they talk about high property taxes and high cost of living here and the cost of doing business here. But one of the things I'd like to concentrate on, and what I believe, and I use this wherever I speak, whether it's before groups like this or other businesses or chambers, trying to get people to focus on our demographics. I believe our demographics and our changing demographics present one of the biggest and greatest challenges to our region. And I'm going to get into some of that. So we take a look, we created the Research Institute about 7 years ago. We used to have the Long Island Regional Planning Board that did a lot of census number crunching, and nobody's doing that anymore, so we do it. And we take a good look at the changing demographics all the time. And there are some things I want to just share with you that, again, I believe create some challenges for us. One, we have a shrinking middle class here on Long Island. We have a growing poverty rate on Long Island. We have a decreasing household formation on Long Island. We have a lower birth rate on Long Island compared to what we historically have had and what other parts of the country have. And fewer youngsters today mean fewer kids for you to educate and fewer workers for the business community tomorrow. And so we need to pay attention to our demographics and what are we going to do, to change and address some of those statistics. We have, incredible assets in our region, and, we all sort of know them. Sometimes we take them for granted, but our schools is really, our K through 12 system is one of our best assets. People want to be here on Long Island for our schools, and our schools then train, educate our workforce, and the business community puts up with a lot of high cost of doing business here because they know they got really good, well-trained and well-educated workers. We have a low crime rate. Nobody, including businesses, don't want to be located in an area with high crime. We have a beautiful environment, rivers, parks, beaches, 1,000 miles of coastline. And our proximity to New York City is always an asset for us. We always will be right next door to the capital of the world. And there's been a lot of investment in our economy over the last 10 years, primarily in the area of our infrastructure, the investments in our Long Island Railroad system. The East Side Access Tunnel is going to be opening up in 2 years, giving us direct access to the east side of Manhattan. Anything we could do to make it easier for people to get to and from New York City strengthens our region, strengthens our economy. Whether you take the railroad or not, 30% of Nassau County residents still work in Manhattan, and they bring back over 50% of the disposable income into the county. 10% of Suffolk residents still commute to the city, but they bring back over 20% of the disposable income to the city. So New York City is still very important to us. Investments are being made in our airports. Our country hasn't built a new airport since Denver in like the 80s. And we're going to have a brand new LaGuardia, a renovated Kennedy Airport. And those are good investments for our region to help us and our economy to continue to grow. But the things I'd like to see us invest more in as well is in our workforce and things like childcare and pre-K, because that is critically important. We work with a lot of different organizations on the island to support investments in childcare. Childcare and daycare, it's not a woman's issue, it's not a family issue. We need to look at that as an economic development issue because businesses rely on men and women in their workforce, and we need to make sure there's adequate, safe, reliable, and affordable daycare. And so we need a bigger investment in that. There are a lot of challenges facing public education today, and I I think a lot of it always goes towards the budget and spending. And again, another reason why it's important to have a healthy economy, especially on Long Island, is when Long Islanders feel their house is worth more than what they paid for, and when they feel their 401k is doing better and growing, they tend to have a willingness to spend more. And when they feel like their house is not worth what they paid for, or their 401 is tanking, their pockets tighten, and they're leery about spending or investing or paying more in taxes. And so it's important that we continue to invest in our economy. And when it comes to our workforce, what we keep on saying is that a lot of businesses, and this is good for Long Island in general for the last like 25 years, we've really already reinvented ourselves. Our economy was very dependent on the defense industry. You know, everybody knew a family member or neighbor who worked for Grumman or Fairchild or Sperry or one of the defense-related industries. And we transformed ourselves into more of a technology-oriented economy, a life sciences-oriented economy, and a financial services-oriented economy. And we need to be changing again because the economy, the world is changing. You know, look at the things that, you know, just look at the last 10 years, you know. Everybody walks around with phones, and if you're disconnected for an hour, you feel sort of like lost. You know, the computers, the way TV is done today, and movies are shown on 100 different venues, the areas of artificial intelligence and robotics. We got some great companies who are playing in that field now, and again, things are going to continue to change. So what are we doing about preparing the workforce, or educating that workforce, for the change in economy? And that's why I think it's really important for the business community, you know, to work with our educational communities, to let them know where the needs are, where we see opportunities, where the investments are being made, and to then help your industry, you know, educate and train our students so they can participate in those opportunities in the future. You know, there's a big push, and I think rightfully so, in the STEM areas. And we see for Long Island that being a really, like a growth industry. We now have over 25,000 Long Islanders who are working in the life sciences, pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, cosmeticeuticals, I think that's a word, if not I just made it up. We have, you know, some amazing companies who are employing thousands of Long Islanders in that field. Grumman in its heyday had 25,000, 26,000 employees. We already have more than 25,000 in the life sciences industry. And then you add in the opportunities, whether it's in engineering and math and the artificial intelligence, we really think those areas are going to continue to grow. One of the things that we have been successful in doing is getting the state to invest in what we're trying to create, a research corridor here on Long Island. You know, North Carolina, you know, between Chapel Hill and Durham and Raleigh has the research triangle. You know, we have a research corridor here. And Governor Cuomo has bought into it and has invested in a lot of different projects. In fact, we'll be down here tomorrow at one of them, at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. We have, from Brookhaven National Laboratory to Stony Brook University to Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, you add in then the Feinstein Research Institute at Northwell, Hofstra with their business school, medical school, and law school. We have some amazing research institutions. If you just take B&L, Stony Brook, and Cold Spring Harbor, those institutions have generated over a dozen Nobel laureates over the last few decades. You know, most regions of the country would die for one of those institutions, and we have 3 of them. Stony Brook is an AAU university, one of only 62 research universities in that club in the entire country. Cold Spring Harbor is a place where they cracked the genetic code. B&L is the only full-scale Department of Energy laboratory on the East Coast. And the research that's going on in those institutions and the opportunities that will be there at those institutions in the future are tremendous, and something that we need to continue to invest in, and hopefully also train and educate our young folks to have opportunities in those areas. And so we've been investing in those projects, creating a cancer therapeutic center at Cold Spring Harbor, a bioelectronics facility. You know, who ever heard of bioelectronics, 10 years ago? This is going to be a different way to address pain in the body without taking drugs. That's happening over at Feinstein. At Stony Brook, Hofstra and NYIT, all their engineering schools are growing. All the successful regions of the country that are growing economies, they're producing a lot of engineers. And so, again, something where we have the assets and need to continue to invest in. So, trying to tell you some things that maybe you don't hear of every day, but again, I really think it's important that the business community work with the educational institutions. Sometimes there's a natural tension between the two, but I believe, and what I've tried to do over the last 10 years at the LIA is building bridges, and I think it's an important bridge to build between the business community and our educational community. I really think the future after K through 12 is going to be also, not just with BOCES. BOCES, again, when I went to high school, the kids who went to BOCES were the ones who probably weren't geared for college and were going to do things in auto body or learn, how to be a manicurist or something like that. It was almost like frowned upon. I think, today BOCES is like, helping train kids for future careers. And manufacturing is not a dirty word anymore. People are like, I don't want to be building widgets, or I don't want to be working in a factory. Most manufacturing jobs today, especially here on Long Island, are really high paying and require some sophistication, either in education or training. And so I commend BOCES for doing what they do. And after that, where I think a lot of the future is going to be is at our 2 community colleges. We have the 2 biggest community colleges in the state, at Nassau and Suffolk County. Together, over 50,000 students. And where I see, and what we see happening is that people continue to go for more training. Education doesn't end after you get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And companies are continuing to reinvest in training and education. And so going on for advanced certificates. It may be a future career ladder where they go get a certificate and they do a job at a particular company for a few years. They go on and get more training and they get promoted or advanced opportunities. And the community colleges are probably nimble enough and they are nimble enough to adapt quicker and continue to provide those training opportunities. And so I see, again, collaboration between the business community and not just our K-12 and not just our BOCES, but with our community colleges as well. Another thing, again, I try to educate people on, and how am I doing on time? Am I right? I'm doing it right? And it's not a subject everybody wants to talk about, but the discussion needs to happen. And that is about the way we pay for education, at the K through 12 level. And again, it goes to some of our change in demographics. Let me tell you what I mean. So again, we look at our numbers all the time. And About 60 years ago, Long Island was about 97% non-Hispanic white. That number today is under 65%. And and projections are by 2050, non-Hispanic white will be a minority on Long Island. We have a growing Hispanic population outside of the Bronx, Suffolk County, largest Hispanic population in the state. Growing Asian population. African American population still hovers around 10% combined between Nassau and Suffolk counties. But we are still largely a segregated, community, especially when it comes to our school districts. And as I mentioned before, our population is changing, and it's growing in a lot of minority communities, which also have a lot of high cost and low wealth school districts. And we should be concerned about that for a whole lot of reasons, but for a selfish reason from the business community's perspective, is that, all right, where are we getting our future workforce from? And are they going to have the same educational and training experience and qualifications as kids in better school districts, which are not all growing. And so if we're going to be relying on, again, your industry to help educate and train our future workforce, where and how are we investing our resources in those schools, and how best can we make it a fairer process, and also to make sure that they all have the same opportunity, especially to participate in the STEM disciplines. I mentioned before, we're experiencing a decline in the overall number of births and the birth rates in recent years. And, again, that's important, because, again, less children means less children to educate, and then where are we getting our future workforce before? I told you about the investments in the Long Island Railroad and making it easier to get back and forth to New York City. We got a lot of businesses on Long Island who are relying on the New York City labor pool to fill jobs that are going unmet here. So, how do we address that? Well, having a child is obviously a very personal decision, but we got to make sure that we're not putting roadblocks in people's way as they make those decisions. And some of that relate to some of the other challenges that we have here on Long Island, including a lack of affordable housing, a lack of affordable childcare. And these issues go to some people's decision on whether or not to have children. We've had 11% decline in the fertility rate over the last decade, and the average across the country was about 5.5%. So we're almost double the reduction in the birth rate throughout the decline over the same period as the rest of the country. And it also goes to some of the other issues relating to our millennial population. Everybody talks about the millennial, that 20 to 34 year range. On a good news note, we've seen an uptick in millennials, the amount of people over the last 7 years. But we lost over 100,000 of them in the prior 2 decades. Well, why should we be concerned about those numbers? And the millennial population at 20 to 34, and I've said this, people have heard me say this before. Well, it's still despite modern advancements in the healthcare industry and pharmaceuticals, they are still our primary baby-making generation. So what are we doing about making it attractive to retain and attract that generation? And as I said, one of our primary baby-making generations. And again, we need to make sure that we're not putting up roadblocks. And it goes to the issue of, housing and childcare, and also making sure that there are jobs here. And so that's why I think we need to be supportive of the business community, to support economic development, so we're growing and creating jobs, because first and foremost, if there's not a job for them here, they're not going to stay here. They're going to go where the jobs are. And not all of them want to live in the hipster places of Brooklyn and Manhattan. And then some of them want to do that initially, but then come here and start a family. And we got to, again, make sure we keep those opportunities for them here. And so more affordable rentals and multifamily housing throughout Long Island. You're seeing that in a lot of our downtowns. It doesn't work everywhere, but certainly in our downtowns we could. And I don't know if you guys come across this. I know we have some superintendents in the room. A lot of times we see schools be opponents to the multifamily housing projects that are proposed throughout the region. And with the fear that they'll generate too many children, and the property taxes generated by those places won't cover the cost of educating those students. But we've been involved in a recent analysis of the last 10 largest multifamily housing projects in both Nassau and Suffolk counties, and they're producing very little children, but they're generating a whole lot of taxes. But we need to have that diversity in our housing supply to attract and retain that generation here, and hopefully then someday they will have more children and buy our homes and buy the single-family homes in our communities. And so it's something, again, to pay attention to. Talked about our millennials. So, you heard me mention before, household formation is shrinking too. So we're seeing, over the last 7 years, millennial population increasing, but household formation shrinking. And household formation is, if your son or daughter goes out and gets an apartment, that's a household. If your son and two buddies go out and they rent a house, that's a household. Doesn't necessarily mean family. But we're seeing household formation shrink on Long Island. And again, it goes to the high cost of housing on Long Island. You see more and more younger people living with their families. Back in the 1970s, the amount of 20 to 34-year-olds that were living with their families was 10%. Today it's over 60%. And again, household formation is important. Go out, get an apartment, go out, get a house. They're spending money, they're going to PC Richards and buying appliances, and that generates sales tax. They may be hiring a lawyer or an accountant to do a closing, and it all has a ripple effect on our economy. So efforts to support affordable housing, I think, need to be supported by the business community and the educational community. And because I think they will have a major impact on how K through 12 operates in the future. And finally, in terms of some of our opportunities, I really think the future of Long Island can be bright. We just, I think, have to be open and receptive to. It's not going to mirror what has happened here over the last 50 years. It's going to be a different place. The jobs are going to be different. Our residents are going to be different and look different. And we need to make sure that the educational opportunities are, equal for, all of them. Because, again, not only because I believe it's the right thing to do, but because, again, from a selfish perspective, these are our future workers. This is our future workforce. What steps are we taking to invest in them? We have all the ingredients for a strong regional economy. As I said, a lot of regions would kill for some of the assets that we have here. We have very well trained and educated people that starts at the K through 12 and our great schools here. We have great colleges, great community colleges. We got the capital of the world right next door. We have one of the most beautiful environments of any region of the country. Playgrounds, golf courses, parks, beaches, you name it, we have it. And We have a very entrepreneurial spirit here. There's about 105,000 businesses in Nassau and Suffolk County, legitimate businesses, and what I mean by that is they pay taxes, and that's how we know we can count them. 93,000 of the 105,000 businesses have less than 20 employees. We're not a one-company town. We have tremendous business, tremendous small business community. We're thankful for our larger businesses, but it's really the small businesses that are the backbone of our region. Our educational institutions are not only important, in terms of educating and training our future workforce, they're all part of the largest employers. I told you, Stony Brook is the largest single-site employer on the island. You add in Hofstra and NYIT and LIU, where we're here today, and Farmingdale, Westbury, our higher ed industry is huge and very important and plays a significant role in our overall economy. I just think we need to reimagine Long Island. As I said, it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to look a little bit different, but that doesn't mean we have to jettison anything. We don't have to jettison our great environment. We don't have to jettison our great schools. What we do need to do is, I think, invest in those institutions. And I think our future here on Long Island could be bright. I still think there are a lot of workers here. Some businesses leave and they go to cheaper pastures and states without an income tax or with real low property taxes. But what they all value the most is our workforce. And you guys play a huge role in training that future workforce and educating that future workforce. And so rather than pitting the business community against the educational community, I really think it's important that we work together, be supportive of both growth and economic development, and likewise the business community needs to be supportive of the educational community because at the end of the day, you guys are training our future workforce. So I hope you found some of that interesting, and I thank you for listening, and I wish you good luck with the rest of your program and seminar.